The blood drained from my face as I stared at the yellowed document hidden behind decades of tax returns, its official seal mocking my 30 years of marriage. David hadn't just betrayed me. He'd never truly been mine at all. Marriage certificate, Eleanor Jean Collins. September 17th, 1991. 2 years before I'd walked down the aisle myself. My hands trembled so violently that the paper rattled like autumn leaves. The attic suddenly felt airless, dust particles dancing in the afternoon light, streaming through the small window. I'd only been looking for our old mortgage documents since David mentioned refinancing. Instead, I'd found the architect of my own devastation, a life built on quicksand. Eleanor Jean Collins, I whispered, the name foreign yet suddenly more intimate than my own reflection. Who was this woman who had claimed my husband first? Did she know about me? Was she still waiting somewhere, wondering why her husband never came home? I sank to my knees among the storage boxes, wedding photos staring down at me from shelves David had built with his own hands. His smile in those frames, was it genuine? The same smile that greeted me each morning over coffee, that promised forever on our anniversary last month. The smile that whispered, "I'd never lie to you, Rebecca," whenever I questioned late nights at the office or unexplained weekend trips. The wooden floor creaked beneath me as 30 years of memories rearranged themselves into something unrecognizable. Our first apartment in Boston, where the heat never worked but we kept each other warm. The summer house in Cape Cod where we raised our daughters. Emma's graduation, Sarah's wedding. Were those moments real, or elaborate performances in a play where I was the only one who didn't know the script? I could hear the kitchen door opening downstairs, David's familiar footsteps on the tile, keys clinking in the bowl by the entryway, the rustle of his briefcase being set down. The ritual of his arrival home had once been the most comforting sound in my world. Now it sent ice through my veins. "Becca, you home?" His voice carried up the stairs, casual and loving. The voice that had wished me good morning over thousands of breakfasts. The voice that had soothed our daughters' nightmares and cheered at their soccer games. The voice that had promised till death do us part. My fingers tightened around the certificate as rage and shock battled within me. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The world I'd inhabited just minutes ago had vanished, replaced by this nightmare where my husband, my David, my partner, my best friend, was a stranger. "Rebecca?" His footsteps were on the stairs now, coming closer. I looked wildly around the attic, at the Christmas decorations we'd collected over decades, at the baby clothes I'd saved from when Emma and Sarah were small. Had any of it been real? The nursery we'd painted together, the kitchen we'd renovated, the garden we'd planted, all our dreams growing alongside our marriage. I thought of the woman I'd been when I met David, 25, ambitious, working at the publishing house in New York. How he'd pursued me with flowers and handwritten notes. How he'd looked at me like I was rare and precious. Had he been married to Eleanor even then? His footsteps reached the landing. "What are you doing up here, honey? It's freezing." I could hear the smile in his voice. The same warm affection that had been my North Star for 3 decades. The attic door creaked open. I didn't turn around. Couldn't. My body had turned to stone, the certificate clutched in my rigid fingers. Sunlight from the window illuminated the government seal, the official signatures, the 2 names bound together. David James Harris, Eleanor Jean Collins. "Rebecca?" His voice changed as he noticed my stillness, my silence. Concern replaced casual warmth. "Is everything okay?" Slowly I turned to face him. The man I'd built a life with. The man who'd held my hand through 2 childbirths, my father's funeral, breast cancer. The man who knew how I took my coffee, where the freckles on my back formed constellations, what my silence meant. A complete stranger. "Who is Eleanor Collins?" I asked, my voice unrecognizable even to myself. His face, I'll never forget how it changed in that moment, like a mask sliding away to reveal something ancient and terrified underneath. In his eyes, I saw the death of our marriage, our history, our future, and I knew, with devastating certainty, that everything was about to change. "My name is Rebecca Harris. At least that's who I've been for the past 30 years. Rebecca Harris of Arlington, Virginia, wife of David, mother of Emma and Sarah, former senior editor turned freelance book consultant. The woman who makes Meyer lemon pound cake for neighborhood potlucks and volunteers at the library every other Tuesday. The woman whose husband apparently has another wife. Our house sits on Maple Street, a 2-story colonial with blue shutters and a wraparound porch where we drink iced tea in summer. David and I bought it when I was pregnant with Emma, stretching our budget because David said I deserved a home with good bones. I loved this house with a fierceness that surprised me. The creaky third step on the staircase, the way light floods the kitchen at breakfast, the height marks of our growing daughters penciled on the pantry doorframe. Before the certificate, my days had a comfortable rhythm. Wake at 6, coffee with David before he leaves for his law firm. Answer emails from authors and publishers while the house is quiet. Maybe meet Judith, my best friend since Emma and her son were in kindergarten together, for lunch. Pick up groceries, plan dinner, call one of the girls. Emma's in Chicago now, teaching high school English. Sarah's closer, in Baltimore with her husband Michael and our grandson Noah. At 57, I'd settled into the gentle current of my life with gratitude. David and I had our routines. Sunday morning crosswords, Friday night movies, walks around the lake when the weather was nice. He still reached for my hand across the center console when we drove. We still made love, less frequently, but with the comfort of bodies that have learned each other by heart. I thought we'd grown more intertwined with age, like those ancient trees whose roots have fused underground. Now I wonder if I've been holding hands with a ghost. I come from a broken home myself. My father left when I was 8. My mother retreated into vodka and silence. I promised myself I'd build something different, something solid and true. Meeting David in that bookstore in New York felt like the universe compensating me for my childhood. He was so steady, so present. His laugh made strangers turn and smile. He remembered everything I told him, as if each detail about me was worth preserving. We got engaged 6 months after meeting. My mother warned me it was too fast. "You don't really know him yet," she slurred at our engagement dinner. I dismissed her bitterness as the residue of her own failed marriage. Now her words echo in my mind like a prophecy. The irony is, I'm the one friends come to for relationship advice. You and David have the marriage we all want. Judith told me just last week over white wine and shared confidences about her own husband's emotional distance. What would she say now? What would anyone say? In the weeks before finding the certificate, life had been remarkably normal. David mentioned wanting to refinance the mortgage to take advantage of lower interest rates. We talked about visiting Emma in Chicago for Thanksgiving. We went to the Andersons' anniversary party and slow danced in their backyard under string lights. David whispered that I was still the most beautiful woman in the room. His hands on my waist felt like home. Last Sunday, we drove to Baltimore to see Sarah, Michael, and Noah. David carried our 3-year-old grandson on his shoulders through the farmer's market, buying him a sticky cinnamon roll and wiping sugar from his cheeks with such tenderness. "You're the best, Grandpa," Sarah said, and David's eyes misted over. Was he thinking of Eleanor then? Did she give him children? Does she know about Emma and Sarah? The night before I found the certificate, David and I sat on our porch swing watching fireflies rise from the lawn. He'd just won a big case, defending a small business against a corporate giant. "Justice for the little guy," he'd said, with that crooked smile that still makes my heart catch. I rested my head on his shoulder, inhaling the scent of his cologne mixed with summer air. "Do you ever think about where we'd be if we hadn't met?" I asked idly. He was quiet for so long that I lifted my head to look at him. Something shifted across his face, something I couldn't read despite 30 years of studying his expressions. "I can't imagine any other life," he finally said, pulling me closer. "Everything I am is because of you." Now those words curdle in my memory. What other life was he living all along? What other woman heard similar promises? After I finished menopause last year, there was this strange sense of crossing a threshold. My body had completed its biological journey. My career had reached a comfortable plateau. Our daughters were launched into their own lives. David and I stood together at this crossroads of aging, and I felt a surprising surge of excitement. We talked about traveling more, maybe buying that cabin in Vermont we'd always dreamed about. The next chapter was ours to write together, or so I thought. Now I stand in our attic holding incontrovertible proof that there is no our story. There's David's story, in which I'm apparently just one of multiple wives. And there's my story, which I'm beginning to understand has been fiction all along. The worst part? Until this moment, I would have sworn I knew this man completely. I could tell you that he can't sleep if there's a ticking clock in the room, that he alphabetizes his books but organizes his music by mood, that he cries at dog food commercials but stayed stone-faced at his mother's funeral. that he takes his coffee black in the morning, but with cream afternoon, that he has a small scar on his left knee from falling out of a tree when he was 9. I know the geography of his body, the history of his career, the architecture of his dreams. But standing here, I realize with sickening clarity that I never knew his heart at all. Who is Eleanor Collins? The question hung between us in the dusty attic air. David stood frozen in the doorway, his briefcase still in hand. I watched the emotions cross his face like weather systems. Shock, fear, calculation, and something else. Something like relief. "Becca," he said, taking a step toward me. I stepped back, clutching the certificate to my chest. "Don't." My voice was surprisingly steady. "Just answer the question, David. Who is Eleanor Collins? And why is there a marriage certificate with your name on it from 2 years before we met?" He set his briefcase down slowly, carefully, as if sudden movements might shatter the moment. "It's complicated," he said, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. The gesture I'd found endearing for decades now made me want to scream. "Complicated?" I laughed, the sound sharp and foreign. Marriage generally is. Bigamy, on the other hand, seems pretty straightforward. David winced. "It's not what you think." "What I think," I said, my voice rising, "is that you've been lying to me for 30 years. What I think is that our entire marriage is fraudulent. What I think is that I don't know who the hell you are." "Please," he said, "let me explain." Oh, I'd love to hear this explanation. The shock was giving way to white-hot rage. "Tell me, David. Tell me how you've been secretly married to another woman our entire life together." He sank down onto an old trunk, suddenly looking every one of his 60 years. "Eleanor and I were young, college sweethearts at Georgetown. We got married right after graduation. Too young, too impulsive." My mind raced, reconstructing our history. "You told me your college girlfriend was named Ellen, that you broke up because you wanted different futures. I couldn't tell you the whole truth," he said quietly. I was ashamed. Ashamed? The word barely contained my fury. "You weren't ashamed enough to get a divorce before marrying me." "I tried," he said, looking up at me with pleading eyes. "Eleanor disappeared right after the wedding. Just vanished. Left a note saying she needed time to think, and then nothing. Her parents hadn't heard from her. None of our friends. I hired a private investigator, but there was no trace." I stared at him, trying to process this. "So you just, what, decided to move on like it never happened? Marry someone else?" He stood up, reaching for me. I backed away again. "Becca, please." I waited 3 years. 3 years of searching, of legal consultations, of dead ends. I was told I could file for abandonment, but the process would take even more years. And then I met you, and I fell in love in a way I never knew was possible. And you lied. I finished for him. "You lied to me every single day for 30 years. "I protected you," he countered, a flash of defensiveness crossing his face. "What was I supposed to do? Tell you I had a wife who vanished into thin air? That legally I couldn't marry you yet? I would have lost you. That wasn't your decision to make." I slammed the certificate down on an old desk, dust billowing up. "You stole my choice. You let me build a life on quicksand. Our life is real," he insisted, his voice breaking. "Everything between us is real. The girls, our home, our love. None of that is a lie. Everything is a lie," I whispered, the enormity of it crushing me. "Our wedding wasn't legal. Are Emma and Sarah even legitimate in the eyes of the law? My God, David, do you understand what you've done?" He reached for me again, and this time I was too exhausted to move away. His hands gripped my shoulders, familiar and foreign at once. After a few years, I convinced myself it didn't matter anymore. Eleanor was gone. Our marriage existed only on paper. What we built, you and me, that was the real thing. "Did you ever try to find her again?" I asked, suddenly needing to know everything. He hesitated, just a fraction too long. "You did," I realized, my stomach dropping. "When?" David released me, turning to look out the small attic window. "About 15 years ago, after my mother died. I started thinking about loose ends, things left unresolved. 15 years ago," I repeated numbly. "When you took that fishing trip to Michigan? That was a lie too?" He didn't answer, which was answer enough. "Did you find her?" My voice was barely audible now. David's shoulders slumped. "Yes." The room seemed to tilt beneath me. I grabbed the edge of the desk to steady myself. "And?" She was married, had 3 kids, living in Seattle under her maiden name. She'd started over completely. Did you tell her about us? About me? He turned back to face me, his expression haunted. Yes, she already knew. She'd hired someone to check on me years before. The betrayal sliced through me anew. So she knew about your bigamy? About our children? And she just kept your secret? She had her own secrets to keep, David said quietly. Her new husband didn't know about me either. We agreed to leave the past buried. How convenient for both of you. I spat. And what about me? I didn't deserve the truth. I was trying to protect our family, he insisted. What good would it have done to upend everything? That wasn't your choice, I shouted, the rage returning in full force. You've been controlling my reality for decades, playing God with my life. Rebecca, please, he begged, reaching for me again. It was wrong, I know that, but I love you. I've always loved you. That has never been a lie. I pushed his hands away. Do you still talk to her? His hesitation told me everything. Oh my God, I breathed, ice spreading through my chest. You do. All these years. All these, what, David? Emails? Phone calls? Secret meetings? It's not like that, he protested. Just occasional updates. For closure. Closure? I laughed bitterly. Is that what you call it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks a lot like you've been living a double life. No, Eleanor and I are nothing to each other now. Just people who share a complicated past. A past that includes a valid marriage certificate, I reminded him. Which means our marriage was never legal. 30 years, David. 3 decades of my life, given to a lie. We can fix this, he said desperately. We'll get lawyers involved, make everything official. No one ever has to know. I know, I cried, tears finally breaking free. I know, and I can never unknow it. Do you understand what you've taken from me? My choice, my truth, my reality. He stepped toward me, his own eyes wet. Rebecca, please, you're my whole world. Everything I've done, everything, has been to protect what we have. What we have, I echoed, feeling hollow. What exactly is that, David? Because I thought we had trust. I thought we had honesty. I thought we had a marriage. We do have a marriage, he insisted. In every way that matters. Except legally, I said flatly. That's just paperwork, he said. What we've built together. That's real. I stared at him, this familiar stranger, and felt something irreparable crack inside me. Paperwork? Our wedding vows were paperwork? The promises you made to me in front of our families, our friends, God, that was just paperwork? That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? I demanded. Help me understand how the man I've loved for 30 years could lie to me every single day. Help me understand how I'm supposed to trust anything you say now. Because I love you, he said simply, as if that explained everything. I have always loved you, Rebecca. That's the one constant in all of this. But as I looked at him, this man whose breaths I could recognize in the dark, whose laugh I could pick out in a crowded room, whose heart I thought beat in time with mine, I realized I didn't know him at all. And worse, I didn't know myself anymore either. I left David standing in the attic and drove aimlessly through the streets of Arlington, past landmarks of our shared history that now felt like monuments to deception. The Italian restaurant where we celebrated our 20th anniversary, the park where David taught Emma to ride a bike, the hospital where both our daughters were born, where David had held my hand and whispered that he'd never loved me more than in those moments. My mind drifted back to the beginning, to the New York autumn when we met. I was 25, an assistant editor with dreams of climbing the publishing ladder. That October afternoon, I ducked into Thornfield Books to escape a sudden downpour. I was in the poetry section leafing through Neruda, when a voice behind me said, "His love poems will ruin you for anyone who can't quote them." I turned to find David, 30 then, with darker hair, and a confidence that made the small bookstore seem suddenly electric. We talked for hours as the rain continued outside, moving from poetry to novels to our own stories. He told me he was a lawyer who'd grown disillusioned with corporate law and was transitioning to environmental causes. I told him about my childhood in Ohio, my mother's alcoholism after my father left, how books had been my escape and my salvation. By the time the rain stopped, the bookstore was closing. He walked me to the subway, and before we parted, he asked for my number with a directness that thrilled me. I've never been more certain that I need to see someone again," he said. 3 days later, he showed up at my tiny apartment with takeout Thai food and a rare edition of Pablo Neruda's love poems. We stayed up until dawn, talking, laughing, eventually kissing as the sun rose over the city. I remember thinking, this is what people mean when they talk about coming home. What I didn't know, couldn't know, was that he was already married. That while he was quoting Neruda and making me feel like the center of his universe, he had a wife somewhere in the legal limbo of abandonment. I thought of our first year together, how he'd seemed almost desperate in his attentions, as if trying to convince himself as much as me that what we had was real, how he'd proposed just 6 months in, on Christmas Eve in Central Park. I'd worried it was too fast, but he'd been so certain. "When you know," he'd said, slipping his grandmother's diamond ring onto my finger as snowflakes caught in his eyelashes. Had he still been searching for Eleanor then? Had he already given up? Or had he simply compartmentalized her existence away, creating a mental lockbox where she could remain while he built a new life with me? I remembered our wedding day, the small ceremony in my hometown church, David's eyes filling with tears as I walked down the aisle. My mother, sober for the occasion, whispering, "He looks at you like you're a miracle." The vows we'd written ourselves, promises of honesty and forever, that David had spoken with such conviction I'd never once doubted him. All a lie. A beautiful, elaborate performance. I drove past the elementary school where Emma and Sarah had learned to read, where David and I had attended countless parent-teacher conferences and school plays. I remembered how proud he'd been at every milestone, how he'd saved every crayon drawing, every report card, every photograph. Had he been thinking of Eleanor's children too? The family he might have had with her? The girls were the hardest part to reconcile. David had been, still was, an extraordinary father. The kind who woke up for midnight feedings without complaint, who built blanket forts on rainy days and taught the girls to change tires and check their oil before they could drive, who cried when Emma left for college, and again when Sarah walked down the aisle. I remembered when Sarah was 7 and terrified of swimming, how David spent every evening for an entire summer in the community pool with her, patient and encouraging, until her fear turned to joy. How he'd sit for hours helping Emma with her dyslexia, creating games and systems until reading became a pleasure instead of a struggle. These weren't the actions of a man playing a role. These were the actions of a father who loved his daughters fiercely, completely. And he'd loved me too. I couldn't deny that, even now. The way he brought me coffee in bed every morning, how he'd call from work just to hear my voice, the love notes I still found tucked into my books or coat pockets, the way he held me through my father's death, my breast cancer scare, my mother's final descent into liver failure, the life we'd built together, brick by careful brick. I thought of the lean years when David left corporate law to start his own practice focusing on environmental cases, how we'd budgeted carefully, both agreeing that purpose mattered more than money, how proud I'd been of his courage, his integrity. Integrity. The word tasted bitter now. I remembered the night Emma broke her arm falling from the treehouse, how David carried her to the car with such gentle strength, telling her stories the whole way to the emergency room to keep her mind off the pain, how he'd stayed up all night beside her bed, watching over her while I caught a few hours of sleep, and Sarah's wedding 3 years ago, how David had danced with her, both of them teary-eyed as What a Wonderful World played, the toast he'd given that had every guest reaching for tissues. "Being your father," he'd said to Sarah, his voice breaking, "has been the greatest privilege of my life." These moments couldn't be fabricated. The love in them was real, yet they existed alongside a deception so fundamental, it threatened to unravel everything. I found myself at Gravelly Point Park, where planes roared overhead, landing at Reagan National. David and I used to bring the girls here for picnics, all of us lying on our backs as aircraft seemed to skim just feet above us. Emma would squeal with delighted terror, while Sarah would cover her ears but refuse to look away. I sat on a bench and watched a plane descend, feeling the rumble in my chest. 30 years of memories played through my mind like a film with corrupted frames. Beautiful moments, genuine connection, real love, all of it existing alongside this massive, unthinkable lie. The truth was, David had been a good husband, a good father, a good man in so many ways that mattered, which made his deception all the more incomprehensible. How could someone capable of such profound love and loyalty also be capable of such sustained dishonesty? As the sun began to set over the Potomac, casting long shadows across the park, I realized I was facing the most difficult question of my life. Was what David and I had built together strong enough, real enough, to survive this revelation? Or would the foundation of lies ultimately cause everything we'd constructed to collapse? I thought of Eleanor Collins, the ghost who had unknowingly shared my husband all these years. Had she loved him as I did? Had she wondered about him, missed him? Or had she been relieved to escape, starting her new life with the same determination David had shown in building ours? As darkness fell completely, I knew I couldn't avoid going home forever. I had to face David again, had to decide what came next. But for this moment, suspended between my past certainties and an unwritten future, I allowed myself to grieve for the marriage I thought I had, a marriage that, like Eleanor Collins herself, had never truly existed at all. When I finally returned home, the house was dark except for the soft glow of the lamp in David's study. I stood in the driveway, looking at the home we'd built together, the flower beds I'd planted, the porch swing where we'd spent countless summer evenings, the window of the nursery that became Emma's room, then Sarah's, and finally David's home office after both girls left for college. I wasn't ready to face him yet. Instead, I walked around to the backyard, to the old oak tree with the wooden swing he'd hung when Emma was 4. The night was warm for September, crickets singing in the darkness. I sat on the swing, pushing myself gently with my toes against the worn patch of earth beneath. I don't know how long I sat there before I heard the back door open. David's silhouette appeared on the porch, outlined by the kitchen light behind him. "Rebecca?" His voice was hesitant, almost afraid. I was worried. "Were you?" I asked, still swinging slightly. "Or were you relieved I might not come back? One less mess to deal with." He came down the steps and crossed the lawn slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal. "I've never wanted you gone. Not for a single moment in 30 years. Except maybe when you were looking for Eleanor," I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. He stood a few feet away, not presuming to come closer. "I've made so many mistakes, Rebecca, but loving you was never one of them." I laughed, the sound hollow in the darkness. "You know what's ironic? All these years, I thought we were special, that we'd somehow escaped the disillusionment that seems to plague so many long marriages. I was so proud of us, David, so certain we were doing it right." "We were," he said quietly. "We are. Stop it," I snapped. "Just stop pretending this is normal, that we're normal." "I'm not pretending anything anymore," he said. "I'm standing here finally, with nothing hidden, asking you to try to understand." "Understand what? That my entire marriage has been fraudulent? That my husband has been lying to me since the day we met? Help me understand that, David." He sank down onto the grass, sitting cross-legged like he used to when he played with the girls. "I never meant to hurt you," he said, his voice breaking. "When I met you, I was lost, trapped in legal limbo with a woman who'd abandoned me, unable to move forward officially. And then there you were, brilliant, beautiful, so full of life. You made me believe in second chances. So I was your second chance," I said flatly. "Not your choice." "You were absolutely my choice," he insisted. "Every day for 30 years, you've been my choice." I stopped the swing, planting my feet firmly on the ground. "But you never gave me the choice, David. You never let me decide if I was willing to enter a marriage that wasn't legally recognized. You never let me choose with full information." He was silent for a long moment. "You're right," he finally said. "I was selfish. I was afraid of losing you. I told myself it was better this way, that the truth would only hurt you." "Well, congratulations," I said, standing up. "The truth is hurting me now, 3 decades later, when our entire lives are entangled beyond separation." I walked past him toward the house, suddenly needing to be anywhere but near him. He scrambled to his feet, following me. "Rebecca, please, we can fix this. We can make it legal now. No one ever needs to know." I whirled around. I know, David, and I can't unknow it." My voice echoed across the yard, probably carrying to our neighbors' homes. I didn't care. Inside, I headed straight for our bedroom, the room where we'd slept side by side for decades, where we'd made love and argued and reconciled and grown older together. I grabbed a suitcase from the closet and began throwing clothes into it haphazardly. "What are you doing?" David asked from the doorway, panic in his voice. "I need space," I said, not looking at him. I can't think clearly with you here, with all this history around me. Where will you go? He asked, sounding lost. Judith's, maybe. A hotel. I don't know. I continued packing. Movements mechanical. David stepped into the room, closing the distance between us. Please don't leave, he begged. We should be together right now, working through this. I finally looked at him. There is no we right now, David. There's you and your lies. And there's me trying to figure out who the hell I am if not Rebecca Harris. Because apparently that person doesn't legally exist. His face crumpled. You're the love of my life, he whispered. You're the mother of my children. You're my best friend, my partner, my heart. That's who you are. And who is Eleanor Collins? I demanded. What is she to you? He looked away. A mistake. A ghost. A complication. A complication, I repeated. Like a traffic ticket or a tax audit. Not a whole human being you were legally bound to while pursuing me. It wasn't like that, he insisted. By the time I met you, Eleanor had been gone for years. I'd tried everything to find her, to resolve things legally. But I couldn't put my life on permanent hold for someone who clearly didn't want to be found. So you just... What? Decided the law didn't apply to you? I zipped the suitcase closed with unnecessary force. What happens now, David? Do we just pretend this never happened? Go back to our lovely, fraudulent life? He reached for me, and this time I let him take my hands, too exhausted to pull away. We get lawyers, he said urgently. We find Eleanor, get a proper divorce filed, make our marriage legal. We fix this, together. I stared at our joined hands, the familiar landscape of his knuckles, the wedding band he'd worn faithfully for 30 years. And what if I don't want to fix it? I asked quietly. What if this is too broken to repair? His grip tightened. Don't say that, he pleaded. 30 years, Becca. 2 beautiful daughters. A lifetime of love and memories. That can't all be erased by one mistake, no matter how terrible. One mistake? I pulled my hands free. This wasn't one moment of weakness, David. This was a deliberate choice you made every single day for 30 years. Every morning you woke up next to me and chose not to tell me the truth. Because I love you, he cried. Because I couldn't bear to lose you. Well, that worked out great, didn't it? I said bitterly, grabbing my suitcase. Because here we are, with you losing me anyway. As I moved toward the door, David stepped into my path. You can't just walk away from 30 years, he said, desperation making his voice shake. Watch me. I tried to step around him, but he caught my arm. Rebecca, please. The girls... Don't you dare, I hissed. Don't you dare use our daughters as leverage. That's not what I meant, he said. What do we tell them? I don't know, David. Maybe the truth. Novel concept for you, I know. The cruelty of my words hung in the air between us. David recoiled as if I'd slapped him. I deserve that, he said quietly. I deserve your anger, your contempt. But please, don't make any permanent decisions tonight. Stay. Yell at me. Throw things. Lock yourself in the guest room. Anything. Just don't leave. I hesitated, exhaustion suddenly overwhelming me. The thought of explaining this situation to Judith, or checking into a hotel alone, felt almost as impossible as staying in this house with David. He sensed my wavering. One night, he said softly, just stay tonight. Tomorrow, if you still want to go, I won't try to stop you. I set the suitcase down slowly. I'll sleep in the guest room. Relief washed over his face. Thank you, he whispered. I pushed past him and headed for the guest bedroom at the end of the hall, the room where my mother had stayed during her final months when cancer had finally accomplished what alcohol couldn't. I closed the door behind me and sank onto the edge of the bed. Through the wall, I could hear David moving in our bedroom. The familiar sounds of his nighttime routine, drawers opening and closing, water running in the bathroom, the creak of the bed as he sat down. Sounds that had been the backdrop to my life for 3 decades. I laid back on the unfamiliar bed, still fully dressed, and stared at the ceiling. In the quiet darkness, one thought circled relentlessly in my mind. If David could lie about something as fundamental as the legality of our marriage, what else might he be capable of hiding? Sleep evaded me that night, my mind racing through 3 decades of memories, questioning everything. By dawn, exhaustion had given way to something else, a cold, clear alertness that felt foreign in my body. I showered in the guest bathroom, dressed in yesterday's clothes, and made my way downstairs. David was already in the kitchen, the coffee maker gurgling, his back to me as he stood at the counter. He turned when he heard me, hope and fear battling on his face. "Morning," he said cautiously. I made coffee. I nodded but didn't speak, pouring myself a cup. My hands were steady now, my mind unexpectedly calm. "Rebecca," he started, but I held up a hand to stop him. "I've been thinking all night," I said, my voice flat and unfamiliar even to my own ears. "And I've realized something." He waited, tension visible in every line of his body. "I don't know you," I continued. "I thought I did, better than anyone in the world, but the David I knew wouldn't have been capable of this level of deception. I'm still me," he said quietly. "The same man you've known all these years." "That's the problem," I replied, setting my cup down carefully. "Because either I've been completely blind, or you're an exceptional liar. Neither option is particularly comforting." He flinched. "What do you want to do?" "I want answers," I said simply. "Real ones. No more half-truths or convenient edits." David nodded slowly. "Anything. Ask me anything. Show me everything you have about Eleanor," I said. "Every document, every email, every piece of information. I want to know exactly what I'm dealing with." Surprise flickered across his face. "You want to know about Eleanor?" "I want to know everything you've kept from me, starting with your first wife." He hesitated, then nodded again. "My office. I have a file." I followed him to his study, a room lined with law books and family photos. He unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk, a drawer I'd never seen opened, and pulled out a slim manila folder. "This is everything," he said, handing it to me with obvious reluctance. I took the folder and sat in the leather chair opposite his desk. Inside was a small collection of documents, the original marriage certificate, a few faded photographs of a young David with a pretty blonde woman, several letters from a private investigator dated 3 years after their marriage, and more recently, a series of emails printed out and stapled together. I examined each item methodically, working to keep my emotions detached. The young woman in the photos, Eleanor, had a bright smile and intelligent eyes. In one picture, she and David stood in front of a campus building, his arm around her shoulders, both of them laughing at something off camera. She was studying international relations, David said softly, watching me. Brilliant, spoke 4 languages, wanted to work for the UN. I continued through the papers without responding. The private investigator's reports detailed multiple dead ends, concluding that Eleanor Jean Collins had effectively vanished. The last report, dated June 1993, just 2 months before I met David, recommended filing for divorce on grounds of abandonment, but noted the process could take years without Eleanor's cooperation. Then came the emails, beginning 15 years ago. The first was from Eleanor to David. "David, I suppose I shouldn't be surprised you found me after all this time. I always knew you were persistent. Yes, I'm married. Yes, I have children. No, my husband doesn't know about you. I'd like to keep it that way. I understand you have your own family now. I hope we can agree to leave the past where it belongs. Eleanor." David's response was brief. "Eleanor, I only want closure, legal closure. My mother died recently and it's made me think about unfinished business. I don't want to disrupt your life. I just need to know why you left the way you did. And I need to resolve our legal situation. David." There were a dozen more exchanges, guarded at first, then gradually more open. Eleanor explaining that she'd panicked after their wedding, realizing she'd made a terrible mistake, that she'd been too young, too afraid to face him, so she'd simply disappeared, that she'd built a new life in Seattle, married an architect, had 3 children. What struck me most was the tone that developed between them. Not romantic, but familiar, comfortable. They shared news of their children, their careers. In one email from 10 years ago, Eleanor congratulated David on Sarah's college acceptance. In another, David offered condolences when Eleanor's father passed away. They had maintained a connection, secret and steady, throughout my marriage. Not an affair, but something almost more intimate, a private understanding between 2 people with a shared history. The final email was dated just 6 months ago. David, Mark's job offer in DC came as a shock to both of us, but we've decided to take it. The kids are all in college or beyond now, and it feels like time for a new adventure. I know this puts us in geographical proximity, after all these years of safe distance. I want to assure you I have no intention of complicating your life or mine. Washington is a big place. The chances of running into each other are slim. Still, I thought you should know, in case the unlikely occurs. Eleanor. I looked up at David, who had been watching me read in silence. She's here, I said flatly. In D.C., and you didn't think this was worth mentioning? I was going to tell you, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. When? I demanded. When we ran into her at a restaurant? When she showed up at our door? I was trying to figure out the right time, the right way, he said, running a hand through his hair. I knew it would open up all the questions I'd been avoiding for 30 years. I closed the folder carefully, my mind working with a new clarity. Have you seen her since she moved here? His hesitation told me everything. David, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. Have you seen her? Once, he admitted. For coffee. Just to establish boundaries. To make sure we were on the same page about maintaining distance. When? He looked down at his hands. Last month. Last month, I repeated. While I was visiting Emma in Chicago. He nodded, shame evident in every line of his body. I stood up, the folder clutched in my hands. I want to meet her. David's head snapped up, shock plain on his face. What? You heard me. I want to meet Eleanor Collins, your wife. The word tasted bitter on my tongue. Rebecca, I don't think that's I don't particularly care what you think is good right now. I cut him off. You've lost the right to make those determinations for me. I want to meet the woman who has been legally married to my husband for the past 33 years. Why? He asked, genuinely confused. What could that possibly accomplish except more pain? Because I'm tired of being the only person in the dark, I said simply. Because for 3 decades, you and she have known the truth while I've been living a fiction. Because I deserve to look her in the eyes and understand exactly what I'm dealing with. David stared at me, clearly trying to gauge my resolve. Whatever he saw in my face must have convinced him. I can try to arrange it, he said reluctantly. Today, I insisted. Rebecca, today, David. Or I walk out that door and call a lawyer before I hit the sidewalk. He held my gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I'll call her. As he reached for his phone, I felt a strange calm settle over me. For the first time since finding the certificate, I wasn't merely reacting. I was choosing, taking control of a narrative that had been hidden from me for too long. While David spoke quietly into his phone in the corner of the study, I looked around at the photographs crowding his bookshelves. Our wedding day, Emma's graduation, Sarah holding newborn Noah, family vacations and Christmas mornings and ordinary moments captured and framed. A life built on quicksand, yes, but also a life with its own weight and substance. Its own truth, separate from the legal reality I'd just discovered. As David ended his call and turned to me with wary eyes, I realized something fundamental had shifted inside me. The Rebecca who had walked into this study 30 minutes ago, hurt, betrayed, lost, was already transforming into someone new. Someone with clearer eyes and a steelier spine. Someone who wasn't going to let anyone else, not David, not Eleanor, not the legal system, determine her reality ever again. She'll meet us, David said, his voice strained, at the Meridian Hill Park, 1 o'clock. I nodded, a strange anticipation replacing the numbness I'd felt since yesterday. Good. As I walked out of his study, I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. My face looked different somehow. Older, perhaps, but also more defined, more certain. For 30 years, I'd been living someone else's version of my life. Today, I would begin writing my own. The drive to Meridian Hill Park was silent, tension hanging between David and me like a physical presence. He attempted conversation a few times, but my monosyllabic responses eventually discouraged him. I stared out the window as familiar D.C. landmarks passed by, feeling strangely detached from the city that had been my home for decades. We parked on 16th Street and walked into the park, autumn leaves crunching beneath our feet. The cascading fountain was running, water steps creating a constant, soothing white noise that seemed at odds with the turmoil inside me. She said she'd meet us by the Joan of Arc statue, David said, his voice tight with anxiety. I nodded, letting him lead the way through the terraced park. As we approached the bronze statue, I saw a woman sitting on a nearby bench, slim, elegant, with silver blonde hair cut in a stylish bob. She stood when she saw us, smoothing her camel-colored coat with hands that appeared steady from a distance. Eleanor Collins, my husband's first wife, his legal wife. She was beautiful in a refined way, the kind of woman who probably never had to raise her voice to command attention. Her eyes, a clear, pale blue, found mine immediately, bypassing David entirely. "Rebecca," she said as we approached, her voice calm and measured. "Thank you for suggesting this meeting." I was taken aback by her immediate acknowledgement, by the lack of awkward introductions. Of course, she knew exactly who I was, had known for years. "Eleanor," I replied, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "I appreciate you agreeing to it on such short notice." David stood between us, shifting his weight uncomfortably. "Should we sit?" he suggested, gesturing to the bench. Eleanor and I both ignored him, our eyes still locked in mutual assessment. "I imagine you have questions," she said after a moment. "A lifetime of them," I confirmed. She nodded, as if this was expected. "I'll answer what I can." We did sit then, Eleanor and I on the bench, David hovering uncertainly before taking a seat on a stone planter several feet away, close enough to hear, far enough to give us some semblance of privacy. "Did you know about me from the beginning?" I asked, deciding to start with what mattered most to me. Eleanor folded her hands in her lap. "Not immediately, no. I left David in 1991. I didn't check on him until around 1996, when I was getting remarried myself. I wanted to make sure there wouldn't be complications. And that's when you discovered he'd married me." She nodded. "Yes. Illegally, of course, though I doubted you were aware of that fact." "I wasn't," I confirmed, a flash of bitterness surfacing. "Not until yesterday." Something like sympathy crossed her face. "That must have been quite a shock. Why didn't you say anything?" I asked, the question that had been burning in me. "When you found out about me, about our marriage, why keep his secret?" Eleanor sighed, looking out at the fountain for a moment. Self-preservation primarily. I had disappeared deliberately, changed my name, started over completely. I was building a new life, preparing to marry a man who knew nothing about my past with David. Exposing David's bigamy would have meant exposing my own deception. "So you both just agreed to pretend the past didn't exist?" "Essentially, yes." She turned back to me. "It seemed the simplest solution for everyone. Except me," I pointed out. "I was living a lie without my knowledge or consent." "I told myself you were better off not knowing," Eleanor said, with a directness I hadn't expected. That ignorance was kinder than truth in this case. I suspect David told himself the same thing. I glanced at David, who was watching us with naked anxiety, then back to Eleanor. "You've been in contact with him all these years." It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway. Sporadically at first, more regularly in recent years. Email mostly, the occasional phone call. "Why?" I asked, genuinely curious. "If you left him, if you built this whole new life, why maintain any connection at all?" Eleanor was quiet for a moment, considering. "The older I get, the more I value the people who knew me when I was young," she finally said. "David knew me at 22, knew my parents, my ambitions, my fears. There's a comfort in that shared history, even with all the complications. I absorbed this, understanding despite myself. And now you've moved back to DC. My husband's job," she confirmed. "The children are grown. It seemed like the right time for a change. Convenient timing," I observed. A small smile curved her lips. "If you're implying I moved here to be near David, I assure you that's not the case. Mark was offered a position at the World Bank that was too good to refuse. And yet, you've already met with my husband for coffee." She didn't flinch at the accusation in my tone. "Yes, to establish boundaries, to ensure we could both exist in the same city without disrupting each other's lives." "How considerate of you both," I said dryly. "And did either of you consider that perhaps I deserved to be part of that conversation?" Eleanor met my gaze steadily. That was David's decision to make, not mine. I turned to look at him then. This man I'd thought I knew completely. He looked small somehow, diminished by the weight of his deception. "What happens now?" I asked, turning back to Eleanor. "You're still legally married to him." What, exactly?" "Technically speaking, your marriage isn't legally valid," she said carefully. "But after 30 years, there are common law considerations that would likely protect your interests. I raised an eyebrow. You've researched this. Of course I have, she replied simply. I've had a legal sword hanging over my head for decades. I'd be foolish not to understand the implications. Something about her pragmatism, her calm acceptance of the situation, sparked a realization in me. You never intended to resolve this legally, did you? Neither of you did. You were both content to just leave things in limbo indefinitely. Eleanor and David exchanged a glance that confirmed my suspicion. It was easier, she admitted, for both of us. A legal divorce would have required explanations, documentation, public records. We both had new lives we were protecting. At my expense, I said, anger flaring again. Yes, she acknowledged, surprising me with her candor. At your expense. And I'm sorry for that, truly. If it helps at all, I've carried that knowledge, that guilt, for a very long time. I studied her face, looking for insincerity and finding none. Did you love him? I asked suddenly. When you married him? Her expression softened slightly. Very much. We were young and ambitious and certain we'd change the world together. But sometimes love isn't enough, especially at 22. Why did you leave the way you did? Without a word, without an explanation. Eleanor looked down at her hands. Panic. Pure and simple. We got married right after graduation, swept up in romance and possibility. But within weeks, I realized I'd made a terrible mistake. Not because of David. He was exactly who he'd always been. But because I wasn't ready. For marriage, for settling down, for the life we'd planned. So you just vanished? I left a note, she said defensively, then sighed. A coward's way out, I know. I told myself I'd contact him eventually, once I'd figured things out. But days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The longer I waited, the harder it became to face what I'd done. And now here we all are, I said, gesturing to the three of us, 30 years later, dealing with the mess you two created. Eleanor nodded, accepting the accusation without protest. Yes. We sat in silence for a moment, the sound of the cascading fountain filling the space between us. I found myself studying her profile, looking for similarities or differences between us, wondering what it was about this woman that had kept my husband tethered to her, however tenuously, for all these years. I have a proposition, I said finally, the plan that had been forming in my mind since dawn, crystallizing into certainty. Both Eleanor and David looked at me with surprise. Let's fix this, I continued. Legally, permanently. No more secrets, no more limbo. Eleanor tilted her head slightly. What exactly are you suggesting? You and David get a proper divorce. I know it's complicated after all this time, but it can be done. Then, if we choose to, David and I can legally marry. Rebecca. David spoke for the first time, moving closer. Are you saying you want to stay with me? I held up a hand to stop him. I'm saying I want clarity. I want everything out in the open. I want legal standing and certainty. Whether our marriage continues afterward is a separate question entirely. Eleanor was watching me with something like respect. That's remarkably rational, given the circumstances. I'm surprising myself, I admitted. But I refuse to continue living in a fiction. Whatever comes next, it has to be based in reality. She nodded slowly. I have no objection to finalizing a divorce. It's long overdue. There's one more thing, I added, my heart racing despite my calm exterior. I want your help, Eleanor. My help? She repeated, clearly surprised. Yes, you're the key to resolving this legally. But more than that, you know a side of David I never got to see. You understand pieces of this puzzle that I'm still missing. Eleanor glanced at David, who looked as confused as she did, then back to me. What exactly are you asking for? Information, I said simply. Complete honesty. I want to know everything about your marriage, about why you've stayed connected all these years, about what David has told you about me and our daughters. Everything. A strange expression crossed her face. Not refusal, but something more complex. Why? Because for 30 years, I've been the only one in the dark, I explained. You both had all the information, all the power to make informed choices. I didn't. I need that to change, starting now. Eleanor considered this for a long moment, her gaze analytical. I had the distinct impression she was reassessing me, seeing beyond the betrayed wife to something else entirely. All right, she finally said. Complete honesty. You deserve that much, at least. Relief washed through me. Not because I particularly wanted to hear what she might reveal, but because for the first time since finding that certificate, I felt like I was taking control of my own narrative. "Thank you," I said, standing up. "I think we're done here for today. Eleanor, I'll be in touch about the divorce proceedings." David scrambled to his feet, clearly thrown by the businesslike turn of the conversation. "Rebecca, wait." I turned to him, my expression neutral. "I'll meet you at the car in a few minutes. I'd like a moment alone with Eleanor first." He hesitated, confusion and fear warring on his face, then nodded reluctantly and walked away, casting glances back at us as he went. When he was out of earshot, I turned back to Eleanor. "There's one more thing I need to know, and I want the absolute truth." She met my gaze steadily. "Go ahead. Was it ever more than emails and coffee? In all these years, did you and David ever—" "No," she said firmly, not making me finish the question. "Never. Whatever else you may think of either of us, there was no physical relationship after I left. Not once in 30 years. I studied her face, looking for any sign of deception, and found none. Thank you for that, at least." As I turned to leave, she called after me softly. "Rebecca?" I paused, looking back. "For what it's worth," she said, "he does love you. Completely. In all our conversations over the years, that has never been in question." I nodded once, acknowledging her words without committing to them, and walked away toward the park entrance where David waited, a solitary figure watching anxiously for my return. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt the faintest stirring of power. Not forgiveness, not yet. Perhaps not ever. But something equally important. The determination to reclaim my life, my choices, my future, regardless of what path they might take. In the days following my meeting with Eleanor, I moved into our guest room permanently and established new boundaries with David. I would remain in the house for now, but we would live as separate individuals sharing a space while we sorted out the legal mess he'd created. To his credit, David accepted these terms without argument, his relief at my not leaving entirely palpable in every interaction. I took a leave of absence from my freelance consulting work, explaining to clients that a family emergency required my full attention. In reality, I needed time and space to formulate a plan, to understand exactly what my options were, and how best to protect myself going forward. My first step was hiring my own lawyer, Patricia Winters, a divorce attorney renowned for her keen intelligence and unwavering advocacy for her clients. I chose her deliberately, not because I had decided to divorce David, but because I needed someone who would prioritize my interests above all else. "This is certainly unusual," Patricia said during our first meeting, reviewing the documents I'd provided. Her office overlooked the Potomac, the autumn light glinting off the water far below. "That's one word for it," I replied dryly. "Technically speaking, you're not legally married," she continued, tapping her pen against the desk. "However, after 30 years together, you'd likely be considered common law spouses in most jurisdictions. And what does that mean for me practically? It means you have rights," Patricia said firmly, "to property, to financial assets accumulated during your relationship, to retirement benefits. But we'll need to establish those rights clearly, especially given the complexity of the situation." I nodded, taking notes in the leather-bound journal I'd purchased specifically for this purpose. "And my daughters? Legally speaking, what's their status?" "Your daughters are legitimate," Patricia assured me. "The law generally protects children born of marriages entered into in good faith by at least one party, in this case you. They're not at legal risk here." Relief washed through me at this confirmation. "What do you recommend as next steps?" Patricia leaned forward, her expression serious. "First, we need complete financial transparency. I want documents for every account, every investment, every property. If your husband has been capable of hiding a previous marriage for 30 years, we need to ensure he hasn't hidden assets as well." The suggestion sent a chill through me, not because I suspected David of financial deception, but because I realized how completely I had trusted him in every aspect of our lives. "Second," Patricia continued, "we should file a petition for legal separation. This establishes a formal record of your separation date and protects you financially going forward. And the divorce between David and Eleanor? That needs to happen concurrently. I'll coordinate with whichever attorney they select to ensure the processes align properly." By the time I left Patricia's office, I had a comprehensive action plan and a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't about vengeance or punishment. It was about protection, clarity, and finally taking control of my own narrative. When I returned home, I found David in his study, surrounded by papers and looking haggard. He glanced up when I appeared in the doorway. "How was your day?" he asked cautiously, our once natural conversations now strained and formal. "Productive," I replied. "I've hired an attorney, Patricia Winters." He winced slightly. "I've heard of her. She's formidable." "That's the idea." David nodded, accepting this without protest. "I've been going through our financial records," he said, gesturing to the papers spread across his desk. "I want you to have complete transparency about our assets." "Thank you," I said, surprised by his proactiveness. "Patricia will want copies of everything." "Of course." He hesitated, then added, "I've also contacted a lawyer about initiating divorce proceedings with Eleanor. We have a meeting tomorrow." "Good," I said simply, turning to leave. "Rebecca," he called after me, his voice strained. Is there any chance for us after all this is resolved?" I paused in the doorway, not turning back. "I don't know, David. I honestly don't know." That night, I sat cross-legged on the guest room bed with my laptop, creating a new email account separate from the one David and I had shared for years. A small act of independence, but meaningful nonetheless. As I set up the account, an idea formed, one that had been germinating since my conversation with Eleanor. I opened a new email and typed Eleanor's address, which I'd gotten before leaving the park. "Eleanor, as we discussed, I'd like to move forward with resolving the legal situation between you, David, and myself. My attorney will be contacting whoever represents you both in the divorce proceedings. However, I'm also writing about our other agreement, your promise of complete honesty. I'd like to propose a meeting, just the two of us. No David, no lawyers. Just two women sorting through the truth of a situation that has defined both our lives, albeit in very different ways. Let me know if you're willing, and when you might be available. Rebecca." I hit send before I could reconsider, then turned my attention to the other task I'd set for myself tonight, emails to Emma and Sarah. David and I had agreed to tell our daughters together about the situation, but I wanted to reach out to them individually first, preparing them for the conversation to come. To both girls, I wrote simply that their father and I were going through a difficult time, that we needed to discuss some significant issues with them both, and asked if they could be available for a video call this weekend. I was careful not to give details or cast blame. Whatever happened between David and me, he was still their father, and I wouldn't poison that relationship. As I closed my laptop, I felt a strange sense of calm. The initial shock and betrayal hadn't diminished, but they had transformed into something more productive, a clear-eyed determination to protect myself and forge a path forward on my own terms. The next morning, I was surprised to find an email from Eleanor, already waiting in my new inbox. "Rebecca, I'm available to meet whenever works for you. You're right that we should talk privately. There are things you deserve to know that would be difficult to discuss with David present. I'll be at the Renwick Gallery tomorrow afternoon for a showing of American craft art. If you'd like to join me there at 2 p.m., we could speak privately afterward at the cafe across the street." "Eleanor," I replied immediately, confirming the arrangement. Something about her willingness to meet, her apparent openness to sharing information, both reassured and unsettled me. What might she tell me that would be difficult to discuss with David present? What other secrets lurked beneath the surface of my marriage? That evening, David informed me that he and Eleanor had met with a divorce attorney who specialized in complex cases. "He says it's unusual but not impossible," David explained as we ate dinner at opposite ends of the kitchen table, a distance that would have been unthinkable just days ago, because there's documentation of Eleanor's abandonment and the length of time involved. He believes the divorce can be expedited. "Good," I said, pushing food around my plate without much appetite. "Did you tell him about us? About our situation?" David nodded. "Yes. He recommends that once the divorce is finalized, you and I should legally marry as soon as possible to establish clear marital rights retroactively." The phrase hung in the air between us. Legally marry. As if the ceremony we'd shared 30 years ago, the vows we'd exchanged, had been nothing but an elaborate play. "Let's take one legal issue at a time," I said finally. Later, as I prepared for bed in the guest room that was becoming increasingly my own space, I found myself looking at old photographs on my phone. Emma's college graduation, with David beaming proudly beside her. Sarah's wedding, the four of us together in formal attire. Last Christmas, with baby Noah on David's lap, his tiny hand wrapped around his grandfather's finger. These moments had happened. They were real. The love in them was real. That was the paradox I couldn't quite reconcile. How something built on such a fundamental lie could still contain so much genuine love, joy, and connection. As I set my phone aside and turned out the light, I realized I was approaching a crossroads. Once the legal issues were resolved, once Eleanor and David were properly divorced, and the option of a legitimate marriage between David and me was possible, I would face the most difficult decision of my life, whether to rebuild on the ashes of what we'd had, or to walk away and start completely anew. But before I could make that decision, I needed the full truth, all of it, without evasion or convenient editing. Tomorrow's meeting with Eleanor was the next step in that journey, a journey toward clarity, toward agency, toward whatever future I would choose for myself. For the first time in days, I slept soundly, dreamlessly. Whatever came next, I was facing it on my terms, and that, at least, was progress. The Renwick Gallery hummed with quiet conversation as I moved through the exhibition of contemporary American craft, looking for Eleanor. I found her in a room of intricate glass sculptures, studying a piece that captured light and refracted it into rainbows across the floor. She turned as I approached, offering a small smile. "Rebecca, thank you for coming. Thank you for agreeing to meet," I replied, my voice steady despite the nervous energy coursing through me. We moved through the remaining exhibits with superficial commentary, both aware that our real conversation would come later. When we'd seen everything, Eleanor checked her watch. "Shall we get that coffee?" The cafe across from the gallery was busy but not crowded. We found a table in the corner, ordered drinks, and sat facing each other like combatants sizing up their opponent. "I met with my attorney yesterday," Eleanor began, stirring her tea. "The divorce proceedings are underway. She believes it can be resolved within months, given the unusual circumstances." "That's good to hear," I said, wrapping my hands around my coffee cup. "But that's not why I wanted to meet you today." "I know." Eleanor set her spoon down with a small clink against the saucer. "You want the truth, all of it?" "Yes." She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Where would you like me to start? Why did you really leave David?" I asked. The panic explanation seems insufficient for disappearing so completely. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Her pale blue eyes focused on something distant. "The simple version is that I was young and frightened by the permanence of marriage. But the complete truth?" She sighed. "David was different then, controlling in ways that concerned me. Jealous, possessive." This description contradicted everything I knew about my husband. "David? Are we talking about the same man?" A small, sad smile curved her lips. "People change, Rebecca, especially between 22 and 30. When I met David in college, he was brilliant but insecure. That insecurity manifested as jealousy, as a need to know where I was, who I was with. After we married, it intensified. He wanted to approve my friends, my clothes, my career plans. I struggled to reconcile this portrait with the man I knew. That doesn't sound like David at all." "I imagine it doesn't," she agreed, "because the David you met had already learned a painful lesson from my departure. I often wondered if losing me the way he did, so abruptly, so completely, changed something fundamental in him. The thought was unsettling. Had I benefited from Eleanor's pain? Had David's treatment of me been shaped by the fear of losing another wife? "Why didn't you just divorce him properly?" I asked. "Why disappear?" Eleanor looked down at her hands. "Fear, primarily. I was afraid he wouldn't let me go easily. And shame, too. My parents adored David. Everyone thought we were the perfect couple. Admitting the mistake seemed impossible at 22. So instead, you let him marry me illegally," I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "No," she said firmly, looking up. "I didn't let him do anything. By the time I discovered he'd remarried, you'd already been together for years. You had a child. What good would exposing the truth have done then?" I had no ready answer for that. "In my defense," Eleanor continued, "I did suggest to David that he needed to resolve our marriage legally once I found him again. He was the one who argued for maintaining the status quo." "When exactly did you reconnect with him?" 1996, she confirmed. "I was engaged to Mark and wanted to ensure there wouldn't be legal complications. I hired a private investigator who found David easily. He was already established in Arlington with you and..." Emma, is it? Your older daughter? I nodded, a chill running through me at the realization that this woman had known about my family for over 25 years. I contacted him by letter initially, Eleanor continued. Very formal, very distant. He called me immediately, panicked that I would somehow expose him to you. And you agreed to keep his secret, I said flatly. I did, she acknowledged, partly to protect my own new beginning with Mark, but also because David convinced me it would only cause pain to reveal the truth, that you and Emma would suffer for no good reason. He had no right to make that decision for me. No, Eleanor agreed. He didn't. Neither did I. For what it's worth, I've questioned that choice many times over the years. I took a sip of my coffee, now lukewarm. Tell me about your ongoing communication. David made it sound occasional, casual. Something flickered across Eleanor's face. Hesitation, perhaps, or regret. It started that way. A check-in every few years, mostly by email. But after his mother died, something changed. The emails became more frequent, more personal. Personal how? I asked, my heart beating faster. Not romantic, she clarified quickly. Never that, but more intimate in terms of sharing our lives. He talked about you, about the girls, about his work. I told him about my children, my marriage, my career. Why? What was the point of maintaining that connection? Eleanor considered this, her expression thoughtful. For David, I think it was about keeping a door open to a path not taken. Not because he wanted to walk through it, but because knowing it existed gave him some comfort. She paused. For me, it was simpler. David knew me when I was becoming myself. There's value in being seen by someone who witnessed your beginnings. And in recent years, the emails in that file I saw seemed more frequent. She nodded. Yes, particularly after my father died 5 years ago. David had known him well in college. He reached out to offer condolences, and from there, our communication increased. Monthly emails, sometimes more, and phone calls? Occasionally, she admitted, usually around significant events, deaths, children's weddings, that sort of thing. Did you ever meet in person before coming back to DC? Eleanor hesitated visibly. Once, about 3 years ago. I was in DC for a conference and we met for lunch. Did you tell your husband about these communications? About meeting David? No, she said quietly. Mark doesn't know about any of it. About David, about our marriage, none of it. The irony wasn't lost on me. So you've been lying to your husband too? Yes, she acknowledged. Different lies, but lies nonetheless. We sat in silence for a moment, the cafe bustling around us. There's something else you should know, Eleanor finally said, her voice low. Something David may not have told you. I braced myself. Go on. When I contacted David in 1996 after my investigator found him, he asked me not to file for divorce. What? I set my cup down too hard, coffee sloshing over the rim. He said it would raise too many questions, create a paper trail that might eventually lead back to you. He suggested we simply leave things as they were. Me, officially his wife on paper, but living separate lives. He actively chose to continue the deception, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow, even when offered a chance to make things right. Yes, Eleanor confirmed, and I agreed, for my own reasons, but the choice was primarily his. The cafe suddenly felt too small, too warm. I needed air, needed space to process this new betrayal. I should go, I said, gathering my purse. Rebecca, Eleanor said, reaching across the table to touch my hand briefly. There's one more thing you should know. I paused, steeling myself. What is it? The coffee meeting last month wasn't the first time David and I met since I moved back to DC, she said, her voice gentle but firm. We've had lunch 3 times since I arrived in June. The room seemed to tilt slightly. 3 times, I repeated numbly. Nothing inappropriate happened, she assured me, but I thought you deserved the complete truth. No more convenient editing. I stood, needing to escape, to think, to breathe. Thank you for your honesty, I managed to say, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. Rebecca, Eleanor called as I turned to leave. For what it's worth, I believe he truly loves you, more than he ever loved me. Whatever his failings, that much is genuine. I nodded once, unable to form a response, and walked out of the cafe into the crisp autumn air. By the time I returned home, My shock had crystallized into cold clarity. David's car was in the driveway, and I found him in the kitchen preparing dinner, an obvious attempt to please me, to maintain some semblance of normalcy. "Rebecca," he said, relief evident in his voice. I was getting worried. "How was your meeting with Eleanor?" "Illuminating," I said simply, setting my purse on the counter. She was surprisingly forthcoming. Something in my tone must have alerted him. His hands stilled over the vegetables he was chopping. "What did she tell you?" "The truth, David. All of it." I kept my voice steady, controlled, including the part where you asked her not to file for divorce in 1996, when she offered to resolve things legally. The color drained from his face. "Rebecca, I can explain." "Oh, I'm sure you can," I interrupted. "You're very good at explanations, at rationalizations, but I'm not interested in those anymore. Please," he said, setting the knife down carefully. "Just let me—" "3 lunches." I cut him off again. "Not 1 coffee meeting. 3 separate meetings since Eleanor moved to DC. That's what she told me. Is that true?" His silence was confirmation enough. "You're still lying to me," I said, the words falling like stones between us. "Even now, when everything is exposed, when you have nothing left to hide, you're still lying." "They were just lunches," he protested weakly. "Nothing happened." "That's not the point, David." My control finally broke. "The point is that you're constitutionally incapable of telling me the whole truth. About anything, it seems." He took a step toward me, desperation in his eyes. "Rebecca, please. I love you. Everything I've done, everything, has been to protect what we have." "No," I said, stepping back. "Everything you've done has been to protect yourself, to avoid consequences, to maintain control over the narrative." "That's not fair," he argued, a flash of anger breaking through his pleading. "I've spent 30 years building a life with you, being a husband to you, a father to our daughters. One mistake." "It wasn't one mistake," I shouted, my patience finally snapping. "It was a choice you made every single day for 30 years, and when given the chance to correct it, to make things right, you actively chose to continue the deception." David leaned against the counter, suddenly looking old and defeated. "What do you want from me, Rebecca? What can I possibly say or do to make this right?" "I don't know if you can," I said honestly, "but you could start by telling me the complete truth for once. No convenient omissions, no protective half-truths, just raw, unfiltered honesty." He looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed. "Ask me anything. I'll tell you everything." "Why did Eleanor really leave you?" The question clearly caught him off guard. He hesitated, then sank into a kitchen chair. "She said I was controlling," he admitted quietly. "Jealous. Possessive. Were you?" He nodded slowly, shame evident in every line of his body. "Yes, I was insecure, terrified of losing her, and in trying to hold on too tightly, I drove her away." "And with me?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Were you ever that way with me?" "No," he said firmly, looking up. "Never. Losing Eleanor the way I did, it changed me, Rebecca. Made me understand that love isn't about possession or control. It's about trust, about freedom within commitment. Trust," I repeated bitterly, "built on a foundation of lies." "I know how it sounds," he acknowledged, "but in every way that mattered, in every day-to-day interaction, I trusted you completely, and I hoped, I prayed, you would never have reason not to trust me." I stared at this man I'd spent my adult life with, trying to reconcile the David I knew with the one Eleanor had described, with the one capable of such sustained deception. "The girls will be on video call tomorrow," I said finally. "We need to tell them the truth. All of it." He paled visibly. "Everything? About the legal status of our marriage?" "Everything," I confirmed. "No more secrets, David. Not from me, not from our daughters. If there's any hope for anything moving forward, it has to be built on absolute truth from this point on." He nodded slowly, acceptance settling over him like a heavy mantle. "You're right. Of course you're right." I turned to leave the kitchen, exhausted beyond measure. "Rebecca," he called after me, his voice breaking. "Are you leaving me?" I paused in the doorway, not turning back. "I honestly don't know, David, but for the first time in 30 years, it's my choice to make. With all the information, all the truth. And right now, that feels like the only victory I can claim. 6 months have passed since I found that yellowed marriage certificate in our attic. 6 months of legal proceedings, emotional reckonings, and painstaking reconstruction of my understanding of the past 3 decades. 6 months of learning who I am when the foundation of my identity has been shaken beyond recognition. The divorce between David and Eleanor was finalized last month, a remarkably straightforward process once both parties committed to resolution. The judge was sympathetic to the unusual circumstances, and with no shared assets or minor children to consider, the legal ties that had bound them for 33 years were dissolved with surprising efficiency. Telling Emma and Sarah had been as difficult as I'd imagined. Their initial shock and confusion gave way to anger, primarily directed at their father, though I could see them struggling with the implications for their own identities. Were they illegitimate? What did this mean for their understanding of their family history? "But you're still our parents," Emma had said during that painful video call, her pragmatism asserting itself through the tears. "This doesn't change who we are or how we were raised." Sarah had been quieter, more wounded. "I just can't believe you lied about something so fundamental," she'd told David, her disappointment palpable even through the screen. "How do we trust anything now?" I understood her question all too well. In the weeks that followed, both girls processed the revelation in their own ways. Emma, analytical and forward-looking, dove into research about common law marriage and legal precedents, sending me articles and case studies as if understanding the legal framework might somehow contain the emotional fallout. Sarah retreated briefly, needing space to recalibrate her perception of her father, her family history, her own story. Eventually, she reached out to both of us separately, beginning the delicate work of rebuilding relationships on more honest ground. David moved into an apartment near his law office, giving me space to think and breathe in the house that had been our home. He respected my need for distance while making it clear that he hoped for reconciliation. The separation was neither hostile nor particularly amicable. It simply was, a necessary interval between what had been and whatever might come next. I remained in close contact with Patricia, my attorney, who guided me through establishing my legal rights in the absence of a valid marriage certificate. As she had predicted, decades of presenting ourselves as husband and wife, filing joint tax returns, accumulating assets together, and raising children as a married couple created a presumptive common law marriage that protected my interests. My conversations with Eleanor continued, evolving from tense information exchanges to something approaching mutual respect. There was no friendship between us. Too much complicated history stood in the way of that. But there was a kind of alliance. 2 women who had, in very different ways, been shaped by the same man's capacity for both love and deception. Eleanor told me more about the David she had known in college. Brilliant but wounded, carrying the scars of his father's abandonment and his mother's emotional distance. I shared stories of the David I had known, supportive, gentle, devoted to our daughters, a man whose steadiness had been the cornerstone of my adult life. Together, we assembled a more complete portrait, neither entirely villain nor hero, but simply human, capable of growth and change, of profound love and devastating mistakes. Today, I sit on my porch swing, watching spring unfold across the front yard. The azaleas David planted 15 years ago are blooming in riotous pink, and the dogwood tree where we once hung a swing for Emma sways gently in the April breeze. So many memories layered over this physical space, some now called into question, others still achingly genuine. David is coming to dinner tonight. Not our first meal together since the separation, but the first where something significant hangs in the balance. He knows I've made a decision about our future, though he doesn't yet know what it is. The anxiety in his voice when we spoke this morning was palpable. In these 6 months of separation and reflection, I've thought endlessly about what constitutes a marriage. Is it the legal document? The official stamp of societal recognition? Is it the daily acts of care and commitment accumulated over decades? Is it possible for something to be simultaneously authentic and fraudulent? I've also thought about forgiveness, its nature, its limits, its purpose. Whether it's something granted or something achieved through demonstration of change. Whether some betrayals are simply too fundamental to move beyond, no matter how genuine the remorse or how sincere the desire for redemption. Mostly, I've thought about myself, who Rebecca Harris is when stripped of the certainties that defined her for 30 years. What I want for my remaining decades. What I can live with, and what I cannot. The sound of a car in the driveway pulls me from my thoughts. David, arriving with characteristic punctuality. He steps out, carrying flowers, not roses or anything obviously romantic, but a simple bouquet of spring blooms from the farmer's market I've always loved. He sees me on the porch and pauses, uncertainty in every line of his body. "You can come up," I call, my voice steady. He climbs the porch steps slowly, handing me the flowers without presumption. "They had those purple irises you like," he says simply. "Thank you." I set them beside me on the swing. "You're early." "I was nervous," he admits with a small smile. "Couldn't focus on anything at the office." I gesture to the chair across from the swing. He sits, his posture tense despite his attempt at casual conversation. "How was your week?" he asks. "Good," I reply. "Busy. I've taken on a new author. Promising debut novelist. Very talented." He nods, clearly trying to gauge my mood, to predict what's coming. "That's wonderful. You always had an eye for new voices." We continue with small talk for a few minutes. Updates on the girls, on mutual friends, on the neighborhood, dancing around the reason for this particular meeting. Finally, I take a deep breath. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, David. About us, about the past, about what happens next." He nods, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "I know. I want to tell you what I've realized," I continue, "what these months apart have taught me." "Please," he says softly. "The man I married, the man I built a life with, was real," I begin. "Your love for our daughters was real. Your support through my father's death, my cancer scare, all the challenges we faced together, that was real. The life we created had genuine value and meaning, despite the lie at its foundation." Hope flickers across his face, quickly contained. "I've also realized that trust, once broken so completely, doesn't simply repair itself. It must be rebuilt, brick by brick, choice by choice, truth by truth." "I understand," he says, "and I'm willing to do that work, Rebecca, for as long as it takes." I look at him directly, this man I've known and not known for 30 years. "I'm not ready to make a final decision about our marriage," I tell him honestly. "I'm not ready to say yes to rebuilding, and I'm not ready to say no, either." Confusion crosses his face. "What does that mean, exactly?" "It means I'm choosing myself right now," I explain. "My healing, my growth, my independence. It means I need more time to understand who I am apart from you, apart from the story I thought was my life." Are you asking for a divorce?" he asks, the word barely audible. I shake my head. "No, I'm asking for time, for space to figure out who Rebecca Harris is and what she wants for her future. I'm asking you to respect that process, however long it takes." Relief and uncertainty wore on his face. "Of course," he says. "Anything you need. In the meantime," I continue, "I think we should proceed with making our marriage legal, if only for practical reasons. Patricia has prepared the paperwork. It would establish my legal rights retroactively and resolve any questions about the status of our separation." He nods quickly. "Yes, absolutely. Whatever protects you." "This isn't a commitment to reconciliation," I clarify. "It's a practical step to clean up the legal mess and protect both our interests while I figure out what I want." "I understand," he says, though the hope hasn't entirely left his eyes. "And after that, while you're figuring things out, after that we continue as we have been. You in your apartment, me here. Regular communication about practical matters. Dinners together sometimes, if that feels right. Co-parenting our adult daughters and our grandson. And complete honesty. Always. And us? Our relationship?" I consider this question carefully. "Our relationship is evolving, David. Into what, I don't yet know. But I'm not closing any doors permanently today." He nods, absorbing this. "That's more than I deserve," he says finally. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," I reply. "This isn't a gift or a concession. It's simply where I am right now." We sit in silence for a moment, the weight of 30 years hanging between us, the joy and pain, the truth and deception, the love that somehow persisted through it all. "I made dinner," I say eventually. "Nothing fancy, just that pasta you like. Sounds perfect," he says, standing when I do. As we enter the house, not as husband and wife in the old sense, nor as strangers, but as two people navigating an uncharted space between past and future. I feel a curious sense of peace, not because the pain has disappeared or the betrayal has been erased, but because for the first time in 30 years, I am walking forward with my eyes fully open, choosing each step consciously. I don't know if David and I will find our way back to each other in a meaningful way. I don't know if the trust he shattered can ever be fully restored. I don't know if the story of us has reached its final chapters or is merely entering a new phase. What I do know is this: the woman who stands here today, the woman who found a yellowed marriage certificate and watched her world collapse, who faced that collapse with courage and clarity, who refused to be defined by someone else's deception. She is stronger than I ever knew. She is more resilient, more capable of holding complexity, more deserving of complete truth than anyone ever gave her credit for, including herself. That woman, that Rebecca, she'll be fine, whatever comes next. And for now, that knowledge is enough to take the next step, and the next, into a future entirely her own.